Hello and welcome back to this week's Leap Weekly webinar, where we're really going to go over the topic that it's completely normal. Our brain is actually wired for fear and defensiveness, right? And so what I really want to think about is, did you know that we are wired for that fear, that defensiveness, every time that we feel we're attacked, we perceive a threat? Well, that's how we're really wired. And that's why the talk is really called It's Completely Normal. It's because if we're wired that way, we all are wired that way. And too often, when we see advice on feedback, one of the main components that we oftentimes see is this concept of, okay, you need to toughen up. You gotta get thicker skin. Stop getting so upset. But the truth is, that's not how we're wired. And so what we look at is we need to understand how our brain is wired when we receive feedback in order to overcome that, so we can both deliver and receive feedback in a way that really opens us up to the possibility that feedback does offer. Because all of those advices on toughen up, open yourself up, all of that, well, it is pointed at the right thing, which is feedback is good. Feedback improves performance. Feedback just tells you how well you are or not playing this game of life at work. And so that's what we're really going to talk about, is how are we wired and how does it affect us as we receive and give feedback. And so one of the things I always like to start with is a little bit of, why would this be important to me? Why would this be important to me as a manager, as a leader, as an employee? And I always like to start out with a few little statistics and things. And so looking at the research, there is some research that shows that when employees receive regular feedback, and so what that looks like is can't just do our annual performance reviews anymore. We're in a world where we receive feedback and input all the time. And so employees who receive regular feedback are actually have a 14.9% lower turnover rate. So almost 15% lower turnover rate. And we all know that turnover is very expensive. You know, it could be that you've seen statistics that it's 132% of a person's salary. So think about that. If someone makes $100,000, you're paying $132,000 to replace that person. And if 15% of your workforce doesn't feel like they're getting that regular feedback and they're leaving because of it, it's a huge impact on not only financial bottom line, but team chemistry every time we replace people. So keeping that in mind, that, okay, regular feedback actually allows people to feel that this is a safe place to be, because they're receiving the feedback they need to have the best performance as well. So that's one. Another one talked about that 1 in 5 employees are not confident that their manager will give them consistent feedback. And so what I find is that anytime I share a lot of these statistics, I hear things like, oh, well, that's not my group. Okay, well, statistically, if you oversee 50 people, then 1 in 5, that probably means there's about 10 people who really do feel this way. And to understand that, okay, they're not feeling that I'm giving them regular feedback. And so looking at, what can I do to handle that? What can I do to make sure that my people are feeling that they're getting the feedback and being able to give feedback up to the manager and things like that. And so it's about being really important about, what does that look like? And one of my biggest suggestions, which we haven't even gotten to the tips, but I want to give this to you anyway, is that you need to ask your people, ask each person individually, what do they want to see for feedback? What would help them feel connected to the feedback? And so this is really important, because it actually allows them to say, hey, I'm one of those people who I just want to debrief after a project. And you got other people who are like, hey, I just want 5 minutes every once in a while where you come in. So you'll see that each person is individual in how they like to receive feedback, but then being able to hit that is what really connects them to feeling that they are being heard and receiving that both positive and constructive feedback that can help them grow. Another really important one says 69% of employees say they would actually work harder if they felt they were being recognized. And one of the main pieces of feedback is not to only provide constructive feedback of that didn't go well, you need to work on this, whatever it is. It's also about, part of feedback is just recognition, right? Being recognized for hard work, for good work. And so it said that 69% feel they'd work harder. And how often are we always trying to figure out, okay, how do we improve productivity? How do we get people more engaged? Well, look at it. 69% say they'd improve, the way that they work based on providing that feedback. And so being recognized. So that would improve your engagement immediately, your productivity immediately, just by giving some recognition, providing that feedback consistently. And then the last one I just want to share is that 92% of employees believe that negative feedback, if delivered in the right way, has huge positive effects. Think about that. We have a fear of feedback. We're wired for it, right? That's the whole title. It's completely normal. Our brain is wired for fear and defensiveness. But 92% still say, even if something is negative, if we didn't do it right, if it's delivered in a really good way, creates positive results. So why have that fear as we deliver, as we receive? We need to learn how to deliver and receive in order to make that interaction as positive as possible. And so what I want to start here with is talking a little bit about this whole concept, right? That it's completely normal. This is the way our brain is hardwired. Our actual neural pathways are designed for fear and defensiveness. And that's okay. So I want to give you the little bit of the background. What I want to start with is that, way, way, way back, I think tens of millions of years ago, when there were cavemen, cave women, right? And that was our first developed full brain. And what was developed first was way down here, and it was called our amygdala. So that brain developed so that we could start to problem solve and things like that. But the problem was that brain, a specific brain, is actually wired for survival, right? So imagine the cavemen and cavewomen out walking around looking for berries, scavenging, and all of a sudden you hear that little rustle behind the bush, and out jumps a saber-toothed tiger. Well, back then, right, you had to survive. So your brain was triggered to, okay, we see the threat, and then what do? And it was very simple. It was either fight, flight, freeze, right? Fight, flight, freeze. And that dictated whether you survived or not. If we stand up and fight, if we freeze, what happens? If we flee, what happens? And so you take that same hardwired ability. That means that every sense that came into their body immediately drove through the fear and defensiveness, because as soon as that noise rustled, they needed to know, what do I do? Do I run? Do I need to protect myself? So every sense runs through there before it even gets to any other part of our brain. And so when you fast forward to today's world, our brain is hardwired the exact same way. All of our senses bring information in, trigger it through, and it goes right through that survival brain, right through that amygdala, which then filters everything through this lens of fear and defensiveness. And so that's why when feedback comes at us, right? Maybe we're not fighting for our lives from a saber-toothed tiger, but maybe we're fighting for our ego, right? And other things like that, where we have pride, where, oh no, we didn't do anything wrong. And so we actually start to create the same fight, flight, freeze. And then in today's world, they've also added appease to a situation. And so we're actually hardwired from way, way back for survival. And so our brain is designed not to make us happy, not to make us productive, not to help us thrive in these social relationships. No, it's designed to make us survive. And so we have to overcome that burden in order to create great feedback systems within our companies. And it's very, very important and very, very powerful. So yes, that's our brain. That's how our brain is hardwired. But I also want to add to it this concept of the chemistry of our body, because our chemistry is extremely important. And so what I want you to think about is, imagine you've got a zebra, right? They're just walking around, grazing on the grass out in the savannah. Everything's easy, nice. Now remember, all their senses are pulling in things from around them, right? And it's going through their brain, and it's triggering certain things. And so when they get that smell, that crack they hear in the savannah, and they immediately, that perceived threat triggers, and it goes, there's a lion. Immediately what happens is they take off running, and all of the chemicals are flooded through their systems just like us. And so they're flooded with cortisol, adrenaline, testosterone. It starts pumping blood faster through into those muscles, letting them run faster. Huge part is it actually takes oxygen away from their brain and into their lungs so they can run faster and harder. And they run, and then they get away from everything, right? And they stop at the next watering hole. Now, here's the important part. When they stop at that watering hole way over there, you don't probably hear the zebras going, oh my gosh, can you believe how scary that was? Or I have no idea why that zebra didn't chase me. They just never chase me. They just never care about me, right? They never really worry about the situation. They just let it all go, and all those chemicals flood out. But we as humans don't do that. We get all riled up like the zebra. We've got our muscles flared. We get tense. Our breathing it goes fast. Our heart rate goes faster. You can physically feel that. But then we don't let it go. We relive it, and we tell stories about it to our families, to our friends, to our coworkers, and it's what creates vicious cycles when it comes to feedback. It's how our brain is wired. And so what we want to do is we want to provide you with a couple quick tips, a couple quick techniques that you can really use to start to calm and quell this part of your brain and allow yourself to receive feedback in a way that is productive, is engaging, and builds on our relationships. And so I want to start with the first one. And it actually seems very simple, but it's very powerful when it comes to the science of it. And it's just take a deep breath. When they show fMRIs, which is the system where they can see what's happening in the brain live as certain things are happening, they can show that when they put a Buddhist monk who's very mindful into one of these fMRIs, and they actually have them think of a thought that puts them in survival mode, when they practice deep breathing, 3 very deep and slow breaths, they watch what happens on the fMRI. And what happens is your survival brain back here closes down and goes dark, and your prefrontal cortex in the front, which is where relationship building, passion, problem solving, creativity, innovation, all these things, appreciation, happen, right? So, right, feedback should happen up here. This is where we want it because we want to move forward with our feedback. This lights up when we take a deep, deep breath. And that's why when we're receiving feedback, before we go in, during the meeting, taking those deep breaths, letting ourselves process for a moment, let that thought move from the primitive survival all the way up into our prefrontal cortex. The other thing of this is we tell people, sometimes if you read like your performance review, read it, put it in a drawer, let it go, come back the next day, read it again. Because that first read through, we immediately go right through that primitive brain. Give yourself the time to say, okay, I want to look at it from up here. How do I do that? Okay. Now, step 2 we're going to talk about is actually noticing our reaction when it comes to feedback, noticing our reaction. And the reason this is powerful is because we become very self-aware of this hardwiring system. We become self-aware that, hey, acknowledge to yourself, this is normal, right? I'm hardwired for this, and I need to overcome that hardwiring. This is important, right? And so when we say notice, what we're really talking about is notice what happens for you, right? I gave you that it's fight, flight, freeze, or appease. So number 1, notice and label. You know what? I'm noticing that when I receive feedback at work, wow, I kind of go into a flee. You know, I don't really want to accept it. I want to kind of get out of there, just, okay, let's move on, and kind of avoid it. Or maybe I'm kind of an appease person who just, yeah, whatever you say, right? Or maybe you are a fight or a flight. And so just looking at what am I and noticing, labeling my reaction, and then also become more aware for yourself of what happens in your body. You might feel your heart starting to race during feedback, or you might little sweaty palms or a little tightness in your body or your stomach, right? Some uncomfortability. when you're delivering or receiving feedback. And that is normal. So what we want you to do is become more self-aware, because when you start to recognize those signs, the tenseness, the uncomfortability in your stomach, the raised heart rate, that is when you can make the shifts. That's when you have the power to say, I'm going to take this deep breath. I'm going to make a huge shift. And so that is a big one. Label and notice our reactions. Take a journal, jot down some of your thoughts on what you notice, because you're going to see this consistent across so many different areas, not just feedback. And the last one we talk about is called priming for trust. And it's what allows us to make the shift from primitive survival brain up into our prefrontal cortex, right? And it is, how can I be most open to this feedback? How can I approach this environment with the most openness, the most courage to receive or give the feedback, right? We actually talk about with people, and this is a huge tool, so this is not something we can cover right now, but we talk about that priming. It's about really preparing yourself before you even walk into feedback, before you even walk in to give feedback, preparing yourself for who am I meant to be? Who am I here to be? How am I going to receive this feedback with the most open mind? Give it with candor, with courage, with care and compassion for somebody. And really answer that and say, okay, how could I receive this with the best mind? Okay, I'm really going to look at this as a growth opportunity. Talk to yourself about it. Talk to your internal self about it. And you're going to see that as you make those shifts, right? Even though it's completely normal that our brain is wired for fear and defensiveness, we're going to start making shifts that allow us to build those pathways that allow us to have that quicker connection, actually. The more and more we practice this, the quicker and quicker it gets. And so I want to share one final diagram here before we move on. And it is called the wisdom of our six brains here. And it has these pieces. And I told you this primitive amygdala right here. Primitive and amygdala is where that survival happens. We're surviving here, right? But we need to make the shift and come all the way up here into our prefrontal cortex. And so what we're noticing is when we're in survival, right, all of our brains are interconnected. And so that heart brain is what helps us realize, hey, you're speeding up. You're getting a little out of sync with somebody, and your gut brain down here is starting to go, ooh, I don't feel good about this. And so those are our triggers, our recognition that, hey, we need to make a shift. We need to take some deep breaths, let ourselves relax, because when we make this shift, when we slide all the way up here into our prefrontal cortex, what happens is that also connects and triggers with the rest of our brains. And that heart brain starts to calm down, starts to become more in sync with somebody, right? Have compassion, connect, interrelate. Our gut brain relaxes. It triggers us, hey, we're here to connect. We're here to engage with somebody. So what I want you to know is that, yes, it's completely normal that our brain is literally hardwired. There are neurotransmitters, right? That every sense and input we take goes right through survival brain. And as soon as it's through our survival brain, right, then it's connected to say, okay, raise that heart rate. We've got to protect ourselves. But the more and more we practice, we can help wire our brain to have a faster reaction to our prefrontal cortex, allow us to make the shifts quicker and in the moment for ourselves to, hey, take that deep breath. Yes, this is feedback. Here's what we can do with it. Here's what we can learn and grow. And so really practice taking a deep breath. Hey, sometimes we got to read the sheet, walk away, come back a little later. Really take the time. Let yourself make the shifts. Label, notice your reactions. Take that journal and say, hey, I'm really noticing one of the things that happens for me is I get really uncomfortable. I get jittery. My feet move. My stomach hurts. My hands tense up. Label, notice those reactions, because that's the self-awareness we need to make the shifts. And then choose to make the shift. Choose to prime for trust. Choose, how can I be most open? What can I show up like to really receive this with the most open mind, the open heart, whatever it is. And so, yes, we're wired for fear and defensiveness, but we have the power, the ability to shift away from it, and to really see great results when it comes to feedback. Thank you very much. I hope you're here next week, where we're really going to talk about how do you set up feedback? What are some of the systems that you can set up so that you are most successful? And if you're really interested in learning a little more about that priming section, there'll be a piece of that in that setting up feedback as well. So I'll see you here next week. And thank you so much for being here. Look forward to it. Thank you.